of the anti-terrorism law. Bago po ang lahat, huwag pong kakalimutan mag-like and share po tayo sa Facebook at saka sa YouTube. And while you're at it, why don't you follow Luminous by Trixie Cruz-Angeles and Ahmed Paglinawan on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Magandang gabi sa lahat, lalo-lalo na mga nakatambay sa ating YouTube at saka Facebook, Ma'am Joy Santos, Ugian B. Nagkakape daw si Ugian. Nelson Flores, who's DDS Solid. Ferry Calma. Arkel Yap. Okay sana ang dami ng supporters ng BBM Sara Tandem kaso parang walang pandemya. Okay, Marian Choco, Mayang Clarion, Sir Bobby Fajardo, magandang gabi. Josh Espiritu, Luis P. Mindanardo Pascual, Checks and Lines, Chev, Ma'am Yolanda Yoshida, John Brian Monterola, Melo Marcos, Raysun Flores, Serena Labor, Lynn's Video 888, Far Ida Otsoco, Sammy the Bunny, Pauline Kadaowas, and Larry Ramirez, Hushi, Shy Vlogger TV. Gandang gabi. And so many more. I'm so happy to see many of you. Well, this is actually good news. Itong pinag-uusapan natin. Ay, in the meantime, thank you, Kaylwell Costello. Magandang gabi. Alright. Itong ginawa ng ating Korte Suprema is actually good news. Medyo we were careful dun sa pag-post namin kanina ng announcement because syempre hindi ganun ka ano, it might not be well understood by many people. So gayon pa man, we didn't want to say that this is good news or bad news. But on a positive note, the anti-terrorism law is virtually intact. So dalawa lang ang probisyon na dideklara ng ating Korte Suprema na hindi sang-ayon sa saligang batas. So this is how it works. Ang ating Kongreso gumagawa sila ng batas. Pero minsan nagkakamali sila at yung batas na yon ay hindi sang-ayon kapag in-apply mo o pag nakita mo, pag nabasa mo, hindi sumasang-ayon doon sa mga probisyon ng ating saligang batas. Halimbawa, nakaka-transgress or nakakalabag doon sa ating mga karapatan na nakasaad sa Article 3 ng ating saligang batas. It's also, there are other rights also in other provisions. Ganyan po man, doon sa Bill of Rights yun yung maliwanag. No? So, doon sa ating mga karapatan nakalagay doon, no law shall be passed abridging the freedom of speech, of the press, or of expression. So, sabi ng Korte Suprema kanina, may provision dito sa ating anti-terrorism law na labag sa karapatan na yon. At ito ang, and you can look over here, sa Section 4, nakalagay kung ano yung definition ng terorismo. So nakikita natin dyan, engages in acts intended to cause death, engages in acts intended to cause extensive damage, interference with or critical infrastructure, etc., develops, manufactures, etc. So doon at the bottom where we highlighted it in yellow, nakalagay, terrorism as defined in this section shall not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, industrial or mass action. So ano yung mga to? Advocacy, yung pagpapahayag ng particular stand on something. Activism is sometimes a lot online. Protest, dissent, stoppage of work. Ito yung mga strikes, labor strikes. Industrial or mass action. Industrial, usually labor-related. Mass action can be anything else. Protest, dissent, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights. Alright. So, in the course, ito yung sinasabi natin matagal na ang pagrarally po ay ginagarantiya bilang valid na expression sa ating saligang batas. Oo, madalas nakakaantala ito sa atin, gayunpaman, it is part of the democratic process. So, ang terrorism law nakalagay doon na walang portion ng Section 4 o dun sa definition ng terorismo ang nagsasabi na ang valid na protesta, itong mga strikes, mga rallies, and so on, ay magiging considered na terrorism. If they stop there, walang problema. Kaso, meron din nagtag sila. Nakalagay, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to a person, to endanger a person's life, or to create a serious risk to public safety. In other words, yung valid protest, rally, and so on, if they are not intended to cause death, etc., dun lang siya magiging valid. Pero if intended to cause death and physical harm and so on, hindi siya valid. Now, the Supreme Court didn't say na okay lang na mag-intend to cause death, hindi siya considered terrorism. That's not what the court says. Ang sinasabi ng hukuman dito is itong last part, the part we highlighted in green, which says which are not intended to cause death. O, yung valid dissent or protest, strikes, mga ganyan, rallies, which are not intended to cause death, are not considered terrorism. Pero ang sinasabi ng Supreme Court, pag sinabi mo pang not intended to cause death and harm and so on, it is overbroad. Meaning, sa sobrang lawak ng coverage na ito, hindi magiging malinaw dun sa law enforcement agent natin kung ano exactly ang kanyang pwedeng gawin o hindi pwedeng gawin. So, masyado siyang malawak and therefore it is not valid. Kasi ayon sa ating saligang batas, bahagi ng due process yung notice. At yung notice na yun, yung pagsasabi sa atin kung ano yung batas. At kasama dun sa pagsasabi yung batas, hindi lang po yung publication, kung hindi, yung pagka-draft ng batas na yon, kailangan sobrang linaw at sobrang at precise para alam ng law enforcement agents natin, ang mga pulis natin, NBI, and so on, na kung ano ang maaari o hindi maaaring gawin. Okay, ulitin ko ha. The Supreme Court isn't saying na okay lang pag may intention to cause death and so on. Ang sinasabi ng Supreme Court, hindi precise yung pagka-draft ng provision na ito. So it is overbroad, masyadong marami siyang nasasakop at hindi maliwanag dun sa mga ahente natin o sa mga pulis natin kung anong pwedeng gawin o anong hindi pwedeng gawin. So, it will stop there. Yung Section 4 will end at provided that terrorism as defined in this section shall not include blah, 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 and other similar exercises of civil and political rights. Period. Okay? I'm checking your comments. Parang kukonti. Sabi ni Chev, now that the Supreme Court declared ATL as constitutional, I hope that CA will be able to release the proscription where CPP, NPA, NDF will be declared as terrorists. No, 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 no. That's not how it works. The CA will not release anything. The Anti-Terrorism Council will file. So, yung ATC, maghahabla sila, magsasampa sila ng kaso sa Korte de Apelasyon para mag-proscribe ng mga either specific terrorists such as but not limited to Joma Season or terrorist groups. Ang gagawin dyan, magkakaroon ng trial. Hindi basta magre-release ang CA. This is not something that you apply for. This is something that you sue for. So, ihahabla ang NPA, CPP, NDF, and other terrorist groups, Maute, and so on, doon sa Corte de Apelacion o the Court of Appeals at doon lilitisin kung sila nga ay maipoprescribe as a terrorist organization. Okay? So there is no clearance. Eto, sabi ni Jade Kevin Santos, COMELEC gising din yung pa ba i-disqualify mga party lists aligned with CPP, NPA, NDF? Again, wala pa po kasing proscription yan. So, kung sakasakali, what hearing is going to be done to disqualify this will be conducted in the COMELEC where they will receive evidence and the arguments of both parties bago sila mag-decide. Ang tanong na lang diyan sa COMELEC is bakit ang tagal-tagal? Okay? Check natin. Mayong gabi, sabi ni Velinario Florentino. Huwag kakalimutan mag-like, share, and subscribe. So, ngayon, the ATL stands without this provision. Ngayon, may second provision na tinanggal ang ating Korte Suprema. Next. Ito, sabi niya, the second method for designation in Section 25, request for designations by other jurisdictions or supranational jurisdictions may be adopted by the ATC after determination that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation of the UNSCR. After determination. Okay? I think that hindi maliwanag wala kasing sinabi ang Korte Suprema dito kung bakit nila tinatanggal ito. Gayunpaman, sa tingin ko, it might be because medyo vague siya. So, may mga means of designation. So, as we had learned, or should have learned, dalawa yung means para bago well, there are two categories ng mga terrorist organizations. Designated terrorist organizations and second, proscribed terrorist organizations. Ang designated, parang probable cause lang ang hinahanap at ang nagde-determine ng probable cause na yan ay ang Anti-Terrorism Council. In other words, pwedeng mag-hearing ang Anti-Terrorism Council at magkupresenta ang ebidensya ng law enforcement agencies and so on na doon sa mga gawain ng certain groups or people. At dahil sa ebidensya na prinesenta nito, mayroong sufficient evidence for the ATC or an ordinary person to think na itong mga ito ay engaged in terrorist activities. So, probable cause lang. Hindi yan guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So, pag umakyat yan sa Court of Appeals, pag final ng ATC ang proscription against any of the groups or individuals, kailangan patunayan dyan beyond reasonable doubt na ang mga grupo na ito ay terrorist groups or terrorist na individuals. Okay. So, but when that happens, yung mga members ng grupo na yon will be automatically considered terrorists at malilitis po sila under a charge for violating the Anti-Terrorism Act. Yung mga nagre-recruit para sa organisasyon na yon, maaari nang ihabla for violating the Anti-Terrorism Act. At pag may ebidensya ulit, beyond reasonable doubt, sila ay makukulong for that. Okay? So, dito, may mga other means sa anti-terrorism law, may iba-ibang paraan para ma-designate. Hindi lang po yung Anti-Terrorism Council na nagko-conduct ng sarili nilang hearing. Maaaring i-adopt nila yung mga declared terrorist organizations, mga diniklara na ng United Nations Security Council. Pero, yung isang paraan, ito, request for designation by other jurisdictions or supranational jurisdictions which are adopted. So, request for designation pa lang ito, ina-adapt na ng ATC, sinasabi ng Supreme Court, itong particular provision na ito, hindi ito constitutional. Pero hindi nila in-explain kung bakit. Tanong ni Checks and Lines, yung mga nagbalik loob, can they sue? They can be witnesses. The ATC must prosecute, pero these former rebels can testify. Why is it that the ATL authors weren't or didn't make it similar to parallel laws already existing abroad? Di ba nga, mas harsh pa yung version ng ibang bansa? Not necessarily. Actually, inayon kasi yung anti-terrorism law natin sa ating saligang batas. Kaya tignan niyo yung ibang mga provisions hindi automatically declared na unconstitutional. Pangalawa, I cannot make a comparison if you're not going to tell me which provisions you wanted to be included. I assume na yung bahagi nun ay yung detention period. Halimbawa, sa US, meron silang paraan para dadalhin nila yung suspected terrorist abroad at doon hindi nag apply ang US laws at saka mga rights. Katulad ng ginawa nila sa Guantanamo. Dito sa anti-terrorism law natin, bawal po yun. Because it is frowned upon as a violation of human rights. Ito, sabi ni Mayura Girl, yung sobrang tolerable ang freedom of expression kaya nawawala ang disiplina ng mamamayan, yan ang gusto ng mga sindikatong kultong dilawan at mga frontliners ng CPP, NPA, NDF, mga tunay kayo na salot at demonyo sa Pilipinas. I'm sorry, Mayura Girl, I disagree. Isa sa foundation ng demokrasya talaga ang karapatan na magsalita, karapatan magpetisyon sa gobyerno for what we call redress of grievances para pansinin, kilalanin nila yung mga instances na tayo ay mga karapatan natin ay nalabag. Pero walang ibang paraan. Halimbawa, hindi yan suable, hindi mo maitulog sa hukuman, at tinatawag mo yung atensyon ng ating gobyerno doon sa mga issues na posibleng makalabag ng batas or nakaka-damage sa atin. So, these are in the Constitution. Kaya there is no such thing as sobrang tolerable ang freedom of expression. You're going to have to be specific. So, halimbawa, pag sinabi ng isang tao, ibagsak ang gobyerno, that is already punishable by law. Nakalagay dyan, halimbawa, ang mga sa ating revised penal code, yung mga inciting to rebellion and inciting to sedition, these are punishable. So, ang freedom of expression natin hindi nga siya sobrang tolerable dahil marami tayong mga provisions um, sa ating criminal laws that punish certain speech. Sabi ni Fernando Gingging, so what now? Does the ATL Yes, the ATL has always been in effect. Remember, the law takes effect 15 days after its publication in a newspaper of general circulation or in the OG. So, matagal na pong ina-apply at ine-execute yung anti-terrorism law. Hindi nag-issue ng temporary restraining order ang ating Korte Suprema against its execution, kung kaya tuloy-tuloy po ang operasyon ng Anti-Terrorism Council at yung pag-i-implement ng batas. It's already in effect. Matagal na po. Sabi ni Pesto, if Joma Season is proscribed as a terrorist with his asylum status be in jeopardy, I understand that Joma Season has not been granted asylum in the Netherlands. In fact, it was denied at ito ay inapilan niya sa European Parliament. So, it was also denied and he asked for a reconsideration. Gayunpaman, as long as you're still applying at hindi ito nagiging final, you are still covered by the Convention on Asylum. Bawal po mag-repatriate ng mga taong binigyan ng asylum, particularly if they're going to be persecuted in their home country. So, malapit na pong mapatunayan na hindi siya persecuted dito. Sabi ni Ma'am Angela Kahanding, ano na po ang next step? Babalik po ba sa legislators para ma-amend yung law? No. Basta hindi na po considered written in the law yung last part. So, as we were saying dun sa, oops, sa early, yan, dito nakalagay. Dun sa section 4, since this part which is highlighted in green, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm, they are deemed not written in the law. So walang kailangan bumalik dun sa ating kongreso. That's it. Okay na yan. Pero I'm sure magfa-file ng motion for reconsideration ang ibang mga petitioners. Tinatanong ni Arthur Balang, sakop din po kaya nito ang mga terorista pong na-identify sa labas ng bansa at nagtatago sa atin? Yes, kasama po sila. Pwede sila ng immediate designation. They can be proscribed pag kinasuhan sila sa Court of Appeals. Pero usually, pagka nagtatago sila dito at may crimes na sa ibang bansa, madali yung proscription sa atin. So we can either hold them for trial here according to the anti-terrorism law or repatriate sila or i-extradite sila doon sa bansa na naghahanap sa kanila. Tanong ni Kinilo, kamusta na po ang proscription? Ang alam ko na sa RTC na yan at medyo tumagal. Sino ba ang mga abogado ng CPP, NNPA, NDF dyan sa proscription? Ang dami sigurong delaying tactics niya. No, that's not true. Unang-una, noong nag-file sa RTC ang DOJ, it was still the Human Security Act that was in effect. Hindi pa po, wala pa pong anti-terrorism law. At doon po yun nagtagal. Kasi kinasuhan nila sina JOMA and all of these other organizations, pero kasi napakaluwag ng Human Security Act kung kaya't nagtagal ito. Maraming tinanggal dun sa mga respondents. Kasi nga sinasabi ng court, baka kulang sa ebidensya and so on. Ngayon, bago na yung patas, kaya na-designate na sila kaagad ng Anti-Terrorism Council. Ngayon, hindi pa ako sure kung nag-file na sila sa Court of Appeals. So kung hindi pa po sila nag-file sa Court of Appeals, it means lumalaga pa po sila ng ebidensya para pag final nila sa CA, hindi naman matatalo dun sa pagpo-proscribe sa kanila, di ba? So that's, I think, the job now of the ATC is to continue looking for evidence to proscribe them. Fernando Ging is asking, does the government have a chance against the Makabayan Bloc? I am not sure what you mean. The government has never lost to the Makabayan Bloc. Sabi ni Ma'am Yolanda, can we say na po na tapos na masasayang araw ni na Renato at Casino and others? Okay, first we have to distinguish. Hindi po automatic na kapag komunista ka ay terorista ka. Hindi po krimen maging komunista. Kaya nga po, pag tinignan ninyo yung Section 4, tignan ninyo yung definition ng terrorism. Engages in acts. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Sila mismo gasa sa gawa ng mga acts of terrorism na yan or bahagi sila ng conspiracy. Ngayon, kung wala silang overt act, hindi sila yung bomber, hindi sila yung funder, hindi sila yung driver ng getaway car and so on, pero bahagi sila ng conspiracy, then kailangan patunayan nung prosecutor yung conspiracy na yon. So, there is no such thing as an automatic proscription. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin halimbawa kina Teddy Casino, no matter what we think, na oy Teddy Casino, ikaw ay terorista. Hindi po tayo ganyan. That would be libel unless merong designation si Teddy Casino bilang terorista by the ATC, tapos later on para maparusahan siya kailangan ma-proscribe siya as a terrorist. Right? Omeng Satanasha says, hindi ba parang leaning sa mga leftist terrorist groups yung ginawa ng SC na pag-modify ng provisions ng anti-terrorism law? No ma'am, it has nothing to do with that. Actually, ang sinasabi lang ng Korte Suprema, it's bad draftsmanship, masyadong broad yung portion na yon ng Section 4. At parang masyadong vague yung portion ng Section 25 na yon. So wala po silang kinikilingan dito. And in fact, is a good thing kasi para mas maayos yung implementation ng ATL, kailangan yung mga agents ng batas ay maliwanag na maliwanag sa kanila base dun sa simpleng pagbasa ng batas kung ano ang pwede nilang gawin o hindi pwedeng gawin. So dito, sinasabi kasi ng batas intends to, when there is an intention to cause harm and so on, because it's not that easy in a mass action. Eto, sabi ni Danny Boy Garcia, paano po ang mga nagre-recruit sa mga universities para magiging CPP, NPA, NDF? Alright. Pag CPP, NPA, NDF, they're merely designated terrorist organizations. Therefore, yung recruitment is not automatically a crime kasi hindi pa sila proscribed terrorist organizations. Pag sila ay na-proscribe at may nag-recruit, whether sa universities or anywhere else, then magiging punishable as a violation of the anti-terrorism law yung act of recruitment na yon. So, until proscribed yan, yung act of recruitment, hindi siya punishable pa. Sabi ni Aris Golingay, ano po sa tingin ninyo magiging mabigat na ebidensya laban kay Joma Season para mabalik siya dito sa Pilipinas? Um, one of the reasons kung bakit hindi siya ginrantan ng asylum status is the possibility na nakikialam pa siya sa mga activities dito that could be classified as terrorist activities, which makes him suspected as a terrorist. Kasi hindi po binibigyan ng asylum ang mga terorista. So, they only need to prove yung participation niya in terrorist acts dito. Fernando Baulging says, why is it the application of the anti-terrorist led by Ka-Eric party list was denied by COMELEC? Because they have not proven that they are a marginalized group. Kasi para maging valid na party list, kailangan marginalized group nga ito or special interest group. So, maaari pa naman sila mag-file ng motion for reconsideration. Hindi pa po final yan. Or, simply because it's denied doesn't mean that perpetually denied yan. Lalagap lang sila ng ebidensya or babaguhin lang nila yung organizational rules nila para makapasok as a party list organization. Sabi ni John Wick, kaya po suportado ko ang ATL para maging responsable ng lahat ng citizens maski law enforcer o militar sa batas ng bansa lalo kung mag-commit ng crime. Ang mahirap kasi sa NPA, armado sa bundok. Kaya nga po meron tayong AFP na humahabol sa kanila. Sabi ni Chev, how about those government officials being associated with CPP, NPA, NDF? Once proscribed as terrorists, automatically disqualified na sila para tumakbo. No po, mere association is not a crime. Ulitin ko ha. Kunwari, si person A may pinatay. Si person B na kapatid niya does not suffer or cannot be punished for that. Kasi ang gusto ninyo dito is guilt by association. Kailangan pa rin patunayan kung may partisipasyon yung mga tao na yon doon sa mga proscribed terrorist organizations. So kung terrorist front organization sila, may legitimacy, pero sila yung nagpopondo, tandaan na violation ng ATL ang funding of a terrorist activity or a proscribed terrorist group. So, kailangan pa rin patunayan sa hukuman. Sa batas natin, sa saligang batas natin, and in most parts of the world, bawal po ang guilt by association. Thank you kay Ernie Campita. Sabi ni Johnny Revilla, bakit masaya si Teddy Te at Calleja kanina? Nagpapasalamat pa sila kasi panalo daw ang mamamayang Pilipino. Okay. Well, to be fair, kasi nga, overbroad lang yung provision na yon. And in fact, kung papansinin nyo, masaya rin si Solgen Kalida. So, okay na because the main part of the law is still intact. At kung gusto sina Teddy Ten naman kasi, medyo premature yung kanilang petition kasi yung sinasabi ng hukuman, merong mga kaso na nandun sa RTC. Bakit hindi nyo intayin umakyat sa court? Kasi wala namang kayong bit-bit na biktima ng anti-terrorism law. So, they have no loss really here. They can still challenge the law later on kapag merong makulong or ma-convict under the anti-terrorism law. So, hindi po yan, kumbaga, it's not a major loss for them, but it's a major win for us. Do we have, sabi ni Rains Pasay, do we have an extradition treaty with the government of the Netherlands or a government can request Amsterdam to extradite Joma? No po, we have none. None with the, Netherlands. Tinatanong ni Joe, bukas sa Karambola, explain niyo ulit. Yes po, we'll keep explaining this para mas marami po ang makaalam. Sabi ni Dlo Dasal, bakit walang nagfa-file ng DQ kay Lenny ba't puro kay BBM lang? Di kaya ginagawa nila tong DQ kay BBM para di pag-usapan yung kay Lenny? I disagree. I think nobody files against Lenny because wala namang naniniwalang mananalo siya eh. So, sayang effort. Thank you kay Ma'am Abigail Hines. Sabi niya magandang gabi mula sa Geneva, Switzerland. Okay. Si Ma'am Lourdes Wagster, sabi niya, thank you for the clear explanation of the law against terrorism. Watching from Alaska. God bless you. Ang ganda dyan sa inyo, madam. God bless you in the Philippines. Ah, ano daw? Sabi ni Coffee Buddy, Comelec DQ'd Abante Sambayanan because according to the branch head that DQ'd them, they have not stated that they are not a foreign party list. According to Kaere. I have to look at that. You're right. It's ridiculous if true. Sabi ni Danny Boy Gracia, masaya na naman kamatayan Black. Bakit mo naman nasabi yan? Kaya nga po sila nag-file ng mga petition dito dahil kinatatakutan nila itong batas na to. So hindi sila masaya kasi sinabi ng Korte Suprema, most of the provisions here are constitutional. Dalawa lang po ang hindi. Thank you kay Mayamang Paul for your super sticker. Natawa ko sa name mo. Sabi ni BJ Cans, victim ba yung terrorist? I'm not sure what you're talking about. And you're going to have to clarify that. Sabi ni Fernando Baolging, a sympathizer, can he also be considered a terrorist? No po. That is again also guilt by association. So, di ba? You have to do an act. You either conspire or you commit a terrorist act. Yan po ang basihan para maging liable ka criminally. Hindi yung merely sympathizing or merely, di ba, yung nakikisa kami, yung mga ganyan. Hindi po yan terrorist activity unless sabihin nila, nakikiisa kami, go, pumatay pa kayo, and so on. And this is purely an academic exhortation. Go, magpasabog, pumatay, and so on. Sa paghihikayat na yon, violation yan ng anti-terrorism law. So again, it's still an act. Yung mere sympathizing, that's not a crime. Pero kailangan meron silang gawin. Halimbawa, give aid and comfort. Kunwari, may kumatok dun sa bahay ng mga kinaiinisan natin na miyembro ng mga party list. Tak, tak, tak. Party list member opens the door. Oh, galing ka sa bundok? Sige, dito ka. Magtago ka muna dito habang mainit pa, marami pang naghahanap sa inyo. Yan, o harboring a fugitive and so on. Yan, violation yan ng anti-terrorism law, giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Okay. Walang kwentang argumento itong recruiter ka na ng NPA, wala ka pang kaso, so maging NPA na lang tayong lahat. Wait, unang-una, conclusion yung sinasabi mong recruiter ng NPA. Kasi pag nire-recruit dun sa mga universities, they are recruited into organizations. Yung mga organizations na yun, they will conduct, kunwari, immersion or mga awareness programs, teach-ins and all that. So, in the course of that, nararadicalize yung mga estudyante. At yung estudyante na yun, sila mismo will seek actively their own membership into the organization. Sila yung magsasabing, willing ako mamundok. Ganun po yung recruitment na yun. Kaya yung sinasabi ninyong walang kwentang argumento itong recruiter ka na ng NPA, unang-una, di ba? Again, you have to prove the act is violative of some law. Kasi ang layo yung sinasabi ninyo. Unang-una, kung proven na NPA nga, nagre-recruit ka para mamundok direkta yung taong yon. O halika, sama ka dito, punta tayo sa bundok, may dala kang barel and so on. Yan, posibleng na siya, inciting, kumbaga, magiging rebellion, di ba? Magiging recruitment for rebellion. Right now, there's no crime na recruitment for rebellion. Pagka naging miyembro na yon, yung tao na yon, rebelde na siya. Violative na yon ng revised penal code provisions on rebellion. It's a crime. So, kung naiinis kayo, then I think that what you should be doing, hikayat natin ang Kongreso gumawa ng batas na bawal mag-recruit for purposes of committing rebellion. Paano po kung nakikinabang ang mga front ng terrorist group sa mga nakikikil nila? Hindi po ba sila madideklara na kasama ng terorista? Ganito yon. May terrorist. Itong taong to na routinely nagpapasabog. Let's say may pinasabog siyang uh, public infrastructure. Let's say kahit waiting shed. Okay. Meron siyang sinira na waiting shed, ibagsak and so on. Tapos bumili siya sa sari-sari store. Dahil ito yung binayad sa kanya ng ito yung parang sweldo niya for that act. Bumili siya sa tindahan. Would you consider that a crime? Kunwari, itong teroristang to, nabayaran siya for a certain act. Tapos, binigay niya yung pera na yun sa anak niya. Would you consider that child a terrorist? So, malabo po kasi yung sinasabi ninyong nakikinabang. Kailangan, yung act ng mga front organizations ay tumutulong dun sa pag-commit ng terrorism, not the other way around. So yung pakikinabang, that only indicates the association. Pero they have to be committing an act also that violates either the anti-terrorism law or any other criminal law. Sabi ni Arthur Balang, ang Bill of Rights po ba natin applicable din po sa terorista lalo kung gagamitin nila ito as defense sa ATL. Wala po tayong tinatanggal ng karapatan. Kahit sino po may karapatan. Kaya nga po kailangan ng paglilitis bago madeklara na terorista ka. 'Di ba? So, pag naglilitis, may karapatan ka pa. You have everything from the time you're arrested, the right to remain silent, the right to confront your witnesses in court, the right to a trial, and so on. The right to a fair trial by a fair judge is also, it's part of the due process. Pagka nililitis ka, hindi ka pa nga considered terrorista kung hindi ka pa napoprescribean. O ngayon, kung naprescribean ka, considered terrorist ka, papatunayan ngayon yung terrorist activities mo. Hindi automatic na yung simple designation mo as a terrorist because of you're a member of the terrorist organization, it still has to be an act. So yes, yung Bill of Rights po applicable yan to even to criminals and most especially so. Ganito po kasi yan. Kaya may karapatan ng isang akusado is because ang kalaban ng akusado yung estado mismo. The entire machinery of the state, police, in this case, military, the the investigators, the prosecutors, and so on. All of these are the machinery of the state. At lahat yon, they come to bear down on the individual, on the accused. So, aside from your lawyer, wala kang kakampi. So, ginagarantiya ng ating saligang batas na in instances where the entire state's machinery is arrayed against you, yung estado ang napipigilan from going all out against you. Hindi ka pwedeng patayin ng estado, not without due process. So, kailangan ilitis ka bago ka i-execute kung meron tayong death penalty. Nakalagay sa ating saligang batas maliwanag is, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So, ibig sabihin, you may be deprived of your life, your liberty, but, or your property, pero only after a hearing. Shout out daw kay Seth Plate 10. Nasa San Francisco siya. Nagpadala siya. Uy, nung pangkape, maraming salamat. Sabi ni Randy Villamor, some groups are calling for a revolutionary government. Is this considered as terrorism? A call for revolution is usually inciting to rebellion. Now, if you are calling for a violent revolution, calling for, as in actively, sugod mga kapatid, kind of statement, that could be considered inciting to terrorism. Sakop din ba ang UP sa mga nagtatago sa loob ng university? Mananagot ba sila sa batas sa mga tao na protector? Yes, that would mean that they are violating the obstruction of justice law. Wala pong exempt sa UP. Ang hiningi lang po ng UP noon na bahagi ng concordat ay ng agreement with the AFP was bibigyan ng notice yung UP officials bago sila pumasok. Okay? Hindi ibig sabihin no na pagka kunwari pumasok na nga yung pulis pero tinago mo ang isang suspect, may warrant of arrest na sineserve pero tinatago o binabaril nila yung police and so on. UP is not considered a no-fight zone or a zone of neutrality. They're only asking for the police to give notice to the administrators bago sila pumasok to serve warrants and so on. Disagree pa rin ako doon. Pero I don't understand why you would consider na hindi mananagot yung mga nagtago ng mga criminal sa loob ng UP as not liable. Kini says, dahil ba ang anti-terrorism law ay functional pa rin, tuloy pa rin ang ginagawa ng AMLC para putulin ang mga financial donations galing sa loob at labas ng bansa? Yep. Yes po. How about those politicians na magbabayad ng revolutionary tax sa once na prescribed NPA, pwede na silang kasuhan under ATL? Correct. That is true. Yes. That's considered funding a terrorist organization pag na-proscribe na ang NPA. Si Home Diva says, pero yung sa Senado, sa Blue Ribbon Committee versus Family, tinanggal na liberty yung mga witnesses. Totoo yan, madam, at super agree ako dyan sa observation ninyo. Tama po yan. Grabe yung Senado, akala mo wala silang batas. Parang nananahimik ang mga pa-woke at celeb na against sa mga new developments ng ATL. Halatang nakiride lang talaga sa popularity ng mga against sa ATL. Actually, tunay ka. Tama yun. Parang totoo nga. Oo nga, no? Wala pa nga statement sina Miss Angel, Or sino pa ba yung mga artista na nagsalita against it? Sabi ni Ilocano, paano po yung pahayag ni Teddy Casino sa Senate noon na friends sila ng NPA? Napansin niyo ba na kinasuhan ba si Teddy Casino? Hindi siya kinasuhan because that's not a crime. Like I said, kung kaibigan mo, kunwari, si A at B magkaibigan, si A pumatay ng tao, does that make B a criminal? Okay. Ganun po yun. If you make B a criminal, that's simply guilt by association. Walang ginagawa yung tao, magkaibigan lang sila, suddenly guilty na siya. At least sa mata nyo. Tinatanong ni Robbie, tama po ba ang ginawa ng NTF-ELCAC na kumpiskahin ang mga subversibong aklat ng mga makakaliwa? Kailan po nila ginawa yan? Hindi naman po nila ginawa yan. In fact, ang ginawa ng NTF-ELCAC doon sa UP Miagao ay nagdala sila ng sarili nilang materyales. Okay? Ang mga nagsasabing wag na tatanggalin nila ang mga subversibong aklat ay yung dalawang universities. So hindi po NTFL kakang gumawa nun. Okay. Strictly speaking, actually, I disagree with that. Kasi yung mga book burning na yan, parang Nazi ka eh. So, ganon. And there's no such as subversibong aklat. Unless nakalagay doon na tara mamundok na tayo, that is not unang-una, there's no more Subversion Act. Ang bawal ay inciting to sedition, inciting to rebellion, inciting to terrorism, and so on. Wala na nga po ngayong subversibo. Okay? Yung mga, for instance, what would you consider a subversive book? Kung inaaral ang komunismo ng isang political science major, would you consider the books of Karl Marx, etc., would you consider those subversive documents? And is it a crime to be carrying that book? No, it's not a crime because, first of all, there's no law that says that possession of subversive materials or communist materials is a crime. We cannot say that certain things are off limits kasi nililimit din natin yung ability natin to think for ourselves. Pag binasa ninyo ang mga detalye ng ideolohiyang komunismo, kahit kayo sabihin niyo, ew, that's so 5 years ago, diba? Pero kung ibabawal niyo yung babasahin yan, nako, magkakandara pa yung mga batang hanapin yan at saka basahin. Sabi ni June Halog, maraming nakisakay sa issue ng ATL but nobody really took the time to understand it. Kaya nga madaling sirain ang mga argumento nila since all they did was just browse over it to understand it. Sabi ni BJ, may iniintay ba si Senator Bongo? Parang ilang araw na since nag-declare siya na mag-withdraw. Ito yung tanong ko. Why is this such an issue for anybody? Because that's his personal decision. Ngayon, although hindi pa siya formally nag-withdraw, I don't see him actively campaigning either. So, nakita nyo, umariba na yung caravan ni BBL at saka ni Mayora Inday at tuloy-tuloy rin naman ang pangangampanya ng ibang mga grupo, but we don't see Senator Bongo campaigning. Again, it doesn't really matter when he files his withdrawal kasi andun na sa balota yung pangalan niya eh. So wala siyang hinahabol na deadline or anything like that. He can do it at any time before elections. That's what the law says. Sabi ni Ivy, what if one of the members of the Kamatayan Bloc is proven to have full knowledge of at least one activity of the terrorist group, but siya nagsasalita? But I'm assuming hindi siya nagsalita. Is this obstruction of justice? Or may kaso ba? Sa atin kasi, mere knowledge of a crime is not punishable. Sa US, in some states, it is. If you have knowledge of a crime, tapos hindi mo siya ni-report, then you are also, may kaso ka pa rin ng ganon. Ang obstruction of justice, ito yung tinatago mo yung akusado o sinisira mo yung ebidensya. Pero yung failure to report, hindi po. How about a former terrorist then recently surrendered to our government forces? Does this ATL cater to cases retroactively? No, wala pa ngang pinoprescribe na terrorist ngayon. So, technically, we have no terrorists under the ATL. Maliban lang dun sa mga kinilala ng ibang bansa. Sabi ni Randy Lau, hindi ako nanood ng Karambola ngayon kasi dalawa bias lang andun. Buti sana kung andun si Attorney Larry, tatlo sila. And I disagree with the bias, although they have their own opinions. I will give you that much. Sabi ni Karen, Ma'am Karen Minyaw, ngayong malinaw na ipapatupad na ang batas under ATL, madam matagal na pong pinapatupad. Sa opinion niyo po ba mawawakasan na ang NPA? I think nadagdagan lang ng isa pang mechanism or tool ang ating law enforcers para mapuksa ang NPA. Kumukonti na rin naman po sila eh. I think the ATL wasn't just thinking of the NPA but also of other terrorist organizations. Sabi ni Fernando Baulking, ito bang ATL ay ang sagot sa pagwawakas ng CPP, NDF, NPA? It's one of the means of doing it. Pero remember po, hindi lang po CPP, NPA, NDF. Ang dami pong designated na terrorist organizations. Bakit di nyo pinapansin yung mga yon? Ito ay pagwawakas ng lahat ng mga terrorist organizations. Pero sa ngayon, designated pa lang ang CPP, NPA, NDF. Sabi ni Hampas Lupang Ambisyosa, bakit si Miss Wari pinatira sa bahay niya ang ASG? Bakit di kinakasuhan? Well, unang-una, hindi pa po proscribed ang ASG. So, hindi pa siya nagko-commit ng crime under the anti-terrorism law. Kung may kaso na yung mga ASG na yun at tinago niya sa bahay at hindi nahanap ng mga autoridad, ito po ay tinatawag na obstruction of justice. Ngayon, assuming na totoo yan, it might be, baka kulang yung ebidensya. It might be a rumor na tinago niya yung mga yan. Kailangan patunayan yung act of hiding these people. Sabi ni Jomer, malakas pa rin po ba ang ATL kahit tinanggal ang Section 4 ng batas? Hindi po kasi buong Section 4 ang tinanggal. Isang phrase lang po doon ang tinanggal. So yes, malakas pa din po ang ATL. Paano yan? Ang sayang mga boto na punta dyan kay SBG maging straighto. Kandidato pa rin. Ano yan? Baka may something fishy na naman mangyari dyan hanggat wala siyang letter of confirmation. Are you assuming that he's going to commit a crime? And what is your basis for saying that? But, yung stray votes na yan, sa voter yan eh. Outlook na, that's the call of the voter. Kung gusto niya pa rin iboto si SBG kahit nag-withdraw siya because his name is on the ballot, why are you worried about the stray ballots? As long as they are counted as stray ballots, then hindi siya nakakakos ng damage. A stray ballot by itself is not a crime. So, and SBG is not committing a crime by not filing his withdrawal. I don't get it. Bakit kayo nagagalit? Sabi ni Eric Hernandez, listening from Norway, hindi kaya po makaawas sa boto ng BBM if andun pa pangalan ni Senator Bongo? Counted po ba yun kay BBM if sabihin ni Senator Bongo na kay BBM na lang bilang nito? Hindi po, that's not allowed. Yung pag-transfer ng votes, hindi po allowed yan. Makakaawa sa boto ni BBM ang pangalan ni Senator Bongo? Well, if he's running, makakaawas din naman po yan. So, why are you worried about his withdrawal? Hindi ko po naiintindihan. When he was running, galit kayo. When he announces his withdrawal, he's not campaigning or anything, galit pa rin kayo. What is going on? I don't understand. Sabi ni Ma'am Karen, thank you. Salamat sa pamaskong legal expertise lagi. Wag ka sana mapapagod at magsasawa. Sabi ni Christopher Lauder, pansinin ko daw siya. Okay, eto na, pinansin na kita. Hello, nanood ako. Okay naman sila, masaya, nakakaalis ng pagod ang karambola from Japan. I'm Jocelyn. Hi, Ma'am Jocelyn. Sabi ni David Servidad, sorry po, late ako naka-join. Maganda po ba to sa ATL, etong desisyon ng SC o hindi? And kung oo, bakit po maganda? Well, kasi nga it's overbroad. So baka maraming mga unnecessary arrests ang mangyari dahil kulang yung guidelines within the law itself that will inform na ma-inform yung mga agents natin or police officials or officers or personnel natin kung paano i-execute yung part ng batas na yan. Sabi ni Teddy Salazar, kasama po ba sa harboring an enemy kung natatakot ka lang kaya pinatuloy mo? Defense nyo po yun. Pwede nyo sabihin na ito ay coercion. Na tinutukan kayo ng barel kaya tumulong ka and so on. Sabi ni Joe Mar Plamos, listening from the UK, can you explain po the territorial application ng law na ito, how it's going to apply to those who are outside the country like Switzerland? Okay, so hanapin natin yung batas ha. At ilagay ko sa screen. Dahil hinahanap ko yung provision na yun. Medyo hindi ko kabisado kung anong provision yan eh. Violation of the rights of a person under custody, restriction of the right to travel, no torture or coercion, anti-money laundering, authority to freeze, safe harbor, bank officials, penalty for unauthorized revelation. Dali lang ha, medyo mahaba kasi ito eh. Ang hirap hanapin kasi yung provision on that one, medyo maliit lang eh. Okay, nandun yun kasi in part dun sa definition of terms. Ito, extraordinary rendition. Bawal po sa ating anti-terrorism law ang tinatawag na extraordinary rendition. Teka, this, let's share share screen. Ito. Alright. Dito. If you look here, sa section 3, letter C, extraordinary rendition shall refer to the transfer of a person suspected of being a terrorist or supporter of a terrorist organization to a foreign nation for imprisonment and interrogation on behalf of the transferring nation. The extraordinary rendition may be done without framing any formal charges, trial, or approval of the court. Extraordinary rendition po ay mahigpit na pinagbabawal sa atin. So ito yung sinasabi natin na na ginagawa ng US. Yung terrorista or suspected terrorist, suspect pa lang, wala pang trial, dadalhin nila sa Guantanamo, which is not within the territorial jurisdiction of the US. At doon hinuhold nila, tinotorture nila kasi hindi nag-a-apply ang US law doon. So that's one of the extraterritoriality na sinasabi niyo. How is it going to apply to those who are outside the country like Switzerland? Well, dito pwede naman natin yung crimes that yung violation ng ATL that general rule sa atin, the Philippine criminal laws apply only to our territorial jurisdiction. The exception is other areas such as yung mga embassies natin. So those are uh, considered Philippine soil pa rin yung mga yon. Ngayon, even if you commit a violation of the ATL outside of the country, once you come into the country, the ATL is the exception, maaari ka pa rin i-hold for trial here. So, or pwede kang i-extradite pag hiningi yung extradition mo ng ibang bansa. So, pwede yon. Listening from the UK, can you, yun na pala yun. Sabi ni Hazel Therese, Ma'am Hazel, wag na po mag-all caps. Threaten talaga sila sa withdrawal ni Senator Bongo kaya gusto nila pumunta na sa COMELEC. Sinong pupunta sa COMELEC? Ah, sabi ni Alan Guerrero, bakit po sila galit kay SBG? Are the BBM supporters threatened with SBG around? Hmm, I hope not. I hope not because sina BBM and Inday Sara aren't saying anything bad about SBG. And in fact, once SBG made the announcement of his withdrawal, nag-issue ng statement si Inday Sara saying this is going to unify us. So for her, it's probably just a formality, yung actual withdrawal ni SBG. Sabi ni Jomer, di mawala. Meron po kasing kabal daw na nasa paligid ni Bongo na lumalakad ng DQ ni BBM kaya daw hindi opisyal na umatras si Bongo. Wait, unang-una, wag pong kakalimutan, ang nag-file ng kaso na yun ay yung mga dilaw. Don't forget, Teddy Te, Howie Calleja, victims daw of martial law. Sila po ang nag-file niyan. I don't think this government would want to have anything to do or any of its officials would want to, play footsie with the yellows. Uh, for me, hindi po acceptable yung ganyang chismis kasi for now, it's in the realm of chismis. Wala po ako nakikitang ebidensya niyan. Sabi ni Vision, no, not at all. Wala namang name si Bongo. Nope, di kami galit. Ikaw, pero hindi naman ikaw lang ang nagsalita. Bakit ayaw talaga mag-send ng letter to COMELEC? It was clear na hanggat wala itong official letter, kandidato pa rin ito. Yes, but is this an issue? Particularly if you will notice, he has not been campaigning. So, hindi ko gets. Sina, I take my cue kasi from Inday Sara and from BBM. If they're not making any noises about it, and in fact, Madam Inday welcomed his announcement of a withdrawal because it would unify us. What the I mean, I think it's interesting that he still hasn't filed this withdrawal, pero it for me not a cause for concern. Kasi assuming that he doesn't, no, he says he's withdrawing, he doesn't withdraw, tapos later on campaigns, then that's may yan may tama siya sa credibility niya. So right now, it's still all the right moves. For me, he's busy, he hasn't gone to the COMELEC because impractical and all that. Pero the effect is already felt. Hindi na siya nangangampanya. Sabi ni Ma'am Karen, guys, tanong-tanong naman tayo ng mga objective na questions at huwag pangunahan ng assumptions. Clarification po hanap natin. Konting fairness naman. Let's all be fair to BG since wala namang masama o masasakit na salita sinabi personally kay BBM. Sabi ni Ian sa mga vlogger na nga nila mismo nanggaling na mahina manalo si Bongo, yet still they demand and why bother sa physical withdrawal. Kaya, yes, kasi alam nyo, actually, it's not in his favor to ano to change his mind later on if yun ang iniisip ng iba, no, it might not be in his favor kasi diba you say one thing and then you do another, parang medyo, diba, it might be, remember nung si Madam Inday hindi pa nagdi-declare, ang daming criticism about her na ulong-sulong and so on, so it doesn't do him any good to say one thing and then do another. So kung yun ang inaalala ninyo, I'm sure hindi naman po siguro uh, ignorant of this possibility yung mga tumutulong sa kanya, di ba? Sabi ni Romel Racimo, ang nakakainis kasi kay BG, eh alanganin ng salita niya sa action. Nag-worry lang kami na yung mga hindi nauunawaan ang nangyayari, eh mistaken di maiboto pa rin siya. Kasi nasa balota pa rin yung name niya, imbis na dapat kay BBM Sara na, di ba? Why can't this be no and yes, be no, his no be no, yes be yes? Para na rin kasi siyang nuisance candidate niya. Yun lang naman. Si Sir Romel naman, ina-assume mo naman kasi na ang hindi, pag hindi tatakbo si BG, eh yung boto pupunta kay BBM Sara. Tapos, parang nag insist ka pa na kung hindi si BG, edi si BBM Sara ang iboboto nila. It's really up to the voter. So, kung unaware yung mga botante at si SBG pa rin ang binoto nila, then, you know, unang-una, nakikita niya naman yung mga caravans. Mismong mga super diehard BBM, Sara supporters are saying na um, yung super okay na ang posisyon ng dalawa nating kandidato, di ba? They're so ahead. So, if SBG is not campaigning and many of his supporters already understand that he's not running, what's a few stray votes? I don't get it. Why are you insisting na stray votes are a bad thing for all of us? Sabi ni Click Stationable about SBG, di po ba magkikreate ng illusion and confusion sa support sa buha at pwede pang iboto siya at manalo? Yan po ang issue kay SBG, panggulo. Bakit magulo if people want to vote for him anyway, in spite of it? Bakit parang gusto nyo pang diktahan yung magiging boto ng mga taong gustong bumoto kay SBG? I am very confident in the candidacy of BBM and Inday Sara. Hence their lack of statement on this one. Uh, why are you, is this confusion or illusion and confusion going to affect your candidates? Is that your worry? Hindi po madideclare na na, na failure of elections kapag may confusion about voting for him, di ba? And don't you think it's even better now? This situation is still much better than him continuing to run actively. I don't understand. Sabi ni Vision, assume din kayo na galit kami. Please excuse me. Mas okay na umatras siya by word. Bakit kami? Eh, hindi naman ikaw yung tinutukoy ko. Hanggat wala kami nakikita na receive ni Comelec, we're still saying kandidato pa rin yan. Eh di kandidato siya. Bakit issue ang pagkakandidato niya? I don't understand. Issue ba? I mean, isn't he free to be a candidate? I don't understand. May nalalabag ba sa mga karapatan ninyo or natin kapag tumatakbo siya? Ito, balik na tayo sa ATL ha. Seeing the effort of this government to really modernize the AFP during its tenure is really something to be lauded for. Every year, the budget, oh, we're talking about the AFP. On previous administrations had put for the modernization of the AFP, but compared to what this administration is acquiring with regard to modernization, the previous admin is like comparing a Jolly Jeep in Makati to a Michelin star restaurant. Kaya pala hindi nasusugpo o napaparelisa na ang mga terorista dahil kasi wala mga armas. Yeah, true. Sabi ni Joel Arjona, di ko po nasimulan. Pero sa batas na ATL, pwede na po bang mapauwi si Joma para bayaran niya ang mga kasalanan niya sa taong bayan? Hindi po kasi yan in the ATL, although pwede nga siyang i-try. Kaya kunwari, nasa Netherlands siya, tapos siya po ay tumulong doon sa pag-commit ng mga terrorist acts dito, then he can still be tried in the Philippines under the ATL. Pero yung extradition po, hindi po yan sakop ng ATL. So, wala po kasi tayong extradition treaty with the Netherlands, kaya hindi po natin siya mapauwi. And even if the Netherlands was willing to do so. Although wala siyang asylum, nag-apply po siya ng asylum, hindi pa po siya granted. But a person who has applied for asylum is considered to already be protected by the conventions on that. Sabi ni Jaime Cervantes, ano po ba gustong patunayan ni Colmenares tungkol sa anti-terror law? 10-3 na nga sa Hindi ko po alam. Totoo lang. Ah, Sabi ni Ian, sa mga vloggers na nga nilang toxic galing na mahina si SBG, so why the man still be bothered affected much? Okay. Ah, Sabi ni Roland, since may SC revision, it's not a revision, they declare the provision unconstitutional. Is it required to revise then resubmit again in input? No, 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 no. Tatanggalin lang yon. It's deemed not written into the law. They just remove it. The ATL has already been implemented. Ang tinanggal lang yung mga provisions na yon. They're deemed not written into the law. Blessy Harmin says, but it's not unifying at all. Well, maybe, but aren't you giving him credit for not campaigning? I don't understand. By not campaigning right now, he's already at such a disadvantage. Is it still an issue? And ewan ko, ako, I guess, nung umpisa, definitely I felt the divisions sa wall. Ang daming galit, ang daming nag-aaway, and all of these are pro-admin people, which is why for a long time, well, for a vlogger, it's a long time, for several days, hindi ako nag-post about elections. And if you will look at my posts back from 2015 and so on, I really don't like elections because they're so divisive. Especially pag yung mga kaibigan sa kaibigan, and in this case, admin sa admin, pro-admin sa pro-admin ang nagsasalita. So, but I think that with the momentum of BBM Sara, so many things are no longer worrisome for us. There's so many things already you know, have calmed down. And BBM and Inday Sara are both calling for calm. Both of them have been, even with may statement nga si BBM about thanking Joy Belmonte, Mayor Joy Belmonte, in spite of her irascibility or in spite of the refusal to use the Quezon Memorial Circle and so on, and statements about disappointment and so on. BBM was still really very polite and diplomatic by issuing a statement that says that, thank you, Mayor Joy. At nadaanan namin yung city ninyo. And yung sinasabi niyo it's not unifying, that's really also already up to us. Diba? Tayo na rin yung mga we are the ones who will set the tone. Kailangan ba natin makipag-away? Do we need to really find fault anymore? Parang what SBG has already said, he's out of the running. Even if his name appears on the ballot, but his refusal to run, to campaign, then this is the good faith that we're already seeing. Besides, ito pang sinasabi nga natin, it is by his own actions that will determine how we're going to see him. So if, for instance, he says he's not running and you guys are so worried, yun na nga, kasi nandiyan pa. And then he does the thing that worries you the most. He continues to become a candidate and then actively campaigns later on during the campaign period. Who is hurt by that? Certainly not the candidates that we are rooting for, BBM and Sarah, who are, way ahead in the polls and all that. It hurts him. So if you're not pro SBG, don't you think that this is one of those things where you should not interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake? Sabi ni Sir Louie, ATL ang topping natin. Stop yun na yung EBM and SBG. Sabi ni sports fan, si Go may numbers na din, mahigit kumulang 7 million registered voters ang nakalaan para sa kanya. Of course, that's not bad. Sabi ni Jade Kevin Santos, ganito na lang yan, hindi kayo tunay na BBM supporters kung pinoprovoke nyo yung pakikipag-away kay SBG kasi natitrigger yung feelings nyo ng ibang mga vloggers. Meron bang nagtitrigger? Kayo naman. Ito, sabi ni Ronald Bravo, I want the BBM admin to establish the national broadband network ng Pilipinas. This is one of the keys of our economic recovery. Connectivity equals economic activity. I agree. Hirap na hirap ako kanina sa tambayan. Okay. Ito, sabi ni Freddy Isla, is it possible to include this ATL SC ruling in the K-12 and tertiary curriculum? Okay, first things first. In general, we do not encourage Congress to have a say in curriculum. Okay? Think of what could happen if basta-basta na lang pwedeng gumawa ng batas para pakialaman ang curriculum. Curriculum is part of the academic freedom of the universities. However, it is perfectly legal to require certain subjects. Rizal, for instance, the study of Rizal is required. The study of the Constitution is required. In addition to the basic subjects that are in the primary and secondary grades. And in college, aside from the Constitution and Rizal, yung required na lang yung as stated by the universities. It is never healthy to always ask Congress to intrude in the curriculum. Kasi susunod na niyan, pag namihasa ang ating legislature, ay they'll require, kunwari, teaching of the life of yung relative nila. Teaching of the life of so-and-so. Na ganyan. So it's very dangerous. However, what is required nga is the Constitution. And the laws of the land are required to comply with the doctrines and the tenets and the provisions of our Constitution. So in a way, included na rin siya. I think ang mahalaga is alam natin ang mga karapatan natin. Tinanong ni Ona at Mufasa, is it possible to include Eric's party list? Include in what? I think they can file a motion for reconsideration. Lalong-lalo na kung walang kakwenta-kwenta yung desisyon ng COMELEC. Ganda yung sinabi ni Ma'am Karen, kung kalmado lang si BBM at Inday and then di na nangangampanya si BG, wala akong nakikita na need mag-away pa. What is Inday's pakiusap? Di ba protect BBM? Maybe sa DQ cases na wala namang mabigat na dahilan, basa ko kung Smartmatic na lang ang worry, the Uniteam's caravan is a statement. Sabi ni Zin Shamorta, alam nyo, sad talaga yung mga attack dog vloggers ng loyalista, kuyukoy po ang tawag kay SPG. So disappointed po talaga. Well, we can be better. We can do better. Hayaan na lang natin sila because that is part of their freedom of expression. At kung nasasaktan man si SPG, karapatan niya mag-file ng nararapat na kaso. Gayun pa man, sa tingin ko, although nasasaktan siya, he understands na, yun nga, gusto talaga ng mga taong magpahayag ng ganon. At in case you haven't noticed, SBG hasn't been filing cases. And so I think pinagpapasensyahan niya yung mga ganon. Ah, si Mayamang Troll says, porket nag-withdraw na si BG, ay, nasa na yun? Mali, okay. Mayamang Troll muna. Tama po. Heart, heart, heart. Di ako BBM pero may choice ba? Ala, takot sa dark horse, Uniteam. Sabi ni Roldan, porket nag-withdraw na si BG at nasa balota pa, sa tingin nyo yung boboto sa kanya, ililipat kay Lenny. Parang Lenny din kayo mag-isip. Okay, wag na tayo mag-ano. Wag nang, wag nang mag-insultuhan. We can just meet argument with argument. Sabi ni Ma'am Clarissa, yeah, spare SBG, baka nga pati siya hindi niya iboto sa rin. Grabe kayo. Okay. So, okay, I mean, I think that mas may room para maging masaya. Oh my gosh, I haven't powdered my nose. May room tayo to make this kind of a celebratory kind of campaign, 'di ba? Medyo masaya. Parang this is not kasi 2016 na kailangan sagutin natin lahat ng detractors. Sa ngayon kasi, the build-up is, sanay na tayo at alam natin, this is not going to end well for the opposition. Sabi ni Zaldi Oreo, dalawa lang ang choices kung mawawala ang placeholder na isa. Paano kung may nangyari sa manok nyo? Ano pa ang mga choices, mga dilawan for president? Ito. Sabi ni Glenn Fiddich, reserve yata si SPG kung madi-disqualify si BBM, pero sa ngayon, wag niyo muna akong asahan, sabi niya, na itutuloy niya ang kanyang candidacy, na hindi niya itutuloy. Sabi ni It Doesn't Matter, ang problema talaga dahil si BBM ang natitirang kandidata ng admin ba namin mag-force vote kay BBM, kaya mas okay pa rin na andun name ni Senator Go sa balota kahit paano may choices pa rin kahit talo. Your vote is a statement. Bongo for vice president. People should understand there's nothing wrong to believe or to have faith on a communist type government because that's just an opinion. Ang masama ay manakit ng kapwa. Well said, Sir Lawrence, that is correct. ATL, wala po kaming nababalitaan at tinamaan nito lalo na po sa fundraising ng mga terorista. Pwede po bang isa publiko ang mga tamaan ng ATL? Okay, meron na ngang acquitted So, may isang case ngayon, I understand, I'm trying to remember where, I think sa Marawi. Okay, may mga ganon. Meron ding mga cases against the ASG, mga members of the ASG. Eto, sabi ni Vids Kapati, wishful thinking lang, assuming na kidnap si Joma Season at dinala sa Pilipinas, will he put on trial? Yes, there are cases here. Tinutulungan kaya siya ng Netherlands? Well, they're helping him live. Sabi ni Babadi, ano po ba ang dapat gawin para ma-prescribe ang terrorist groups? They have to file a case for proscription with the Court of Appeals. Ito, sabi ni Emmanuel Dagat and Vlogs, Chaljok ng 36 petitioners of ATA lost in this SC oral arguments versus Soljan Kalida and Team Bye Bye City Leyte. In a 12-3 vote, da-da-da. Okay, we discussed that. Sa decision ng SC about sa dalawang provisions, is it a win for the opposition? No, it's a win for us. It's a win for the government. Sabi ni Ronald Bravo, legal na bang wiretapping via ATL? Legal naman po ang wiretapping under certain for certain crimes such as kidnapping and crimes against the state. So, but you need to get a warrant from the Court of Appeals. So, in-include lang ng ATL yung terrorism as one of those crimes na maaari kang humingi ng warrant for a wiretap. Sa ATL po ba, pasok ba ang crimes committed before the law was implemented? No. There's no retroactivity clause and that clause would have been struck down as unconstitutional kung sakasakali. Ito, sabi ni Oli Noeladores, bantayan nyo ang mga galaw ni Joma sa Netherlands at mga galamay niya dito sa Pilipinas. Lalo na mga dilawans, EU communists will always protect Joma because they make money for their organizations. Okay. Dala ha, medyo baka maglubat yung aking Uh, I'm looking for more questions on the ATL while I plug in my laptop. Ito. Sabi ni way I see it is like this. Ang importante, nag-decide ang Supreme Court sa kabuuan ng ATL. May mga provisions lang na talagang unconstitutional. Wala tayong magagawa. Diyan, kaya let it be na lang as long as na may ATL tayong nasa sandalan. Correct. Anyway, wala naman TRO, di ba? So, even if hindi pa final yung Supreme Court decision, it will take some time kasi baka mag-file ng motion for recon yung ibang mga petitioners, tuloy-tuloy pa rin po yung pag-implement ng ATL. Sabi ni Benjamin Vallejera, yung mga campaign materials ng Gabriela et al. Na nakuha sa kuta ng mga NPA, considered ba yon as conniving sa NPA? Therefore, pwede gamitin ng ATL at ma-disqualify sa pagtakbo as party list. It can be evidence of possible conspiracy with the NPA to raise funds for their candidacy, and then in turn the candidacy or the funds that they get from Congress are feeding the NPA. So yes, that can be considered as evidence, pero hindi pa yan kumbaga hindi yan slam dunk. You're still going to need other evidence. Ito, tama. Sabi ni Christian Eric Boulanier, this is very beneficial pala lalo na sa eleksyon. It makes more sense. I agree. So now, yung mga medyo magkakaroon ng second thoughts yung mga nagpo-provide din. So, itong Gabriela, connection with the NPA, yung lalagap lang ng lalagap ng ebidensya ang ATL until such a time as mai-proscribe nila yung mga yan. Now, once they're proscribed or even pagka na-filean pa lang sila ng proscription, pwede na silang ipa-disqualify kasi yung proceedings dun sa COMELEC don't require as much evidence as the proceedings in the court. Hindi kailangan ganun kabigat yung ebidensya. Sabi ni Jumel Baldo, i-amend po ba mga provisions? Okay, sinagot na po natin to. Magkakaroon. No, 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 no. Nag-decide na po ang Korte Suprema. And so yung portion na considered na unconstitutional is deemed not written into the law. So, kumbaga, erase lang yun. Yun na yun. And it's always been implemented. So, tuloy-tuloy lang po ang implementation. Can the state freeze under ATL the bank accounts of organizations or party lists suspected of funding NPA? No, but they can freeze the bank accounts of those who are designated as terrorist organizations. Ito, pag na halimbawa na DQ si BBM, probable cause po talaga tama po mag-rally o tanggapin na lang po ang katotohanan. Halimbawa lang. I mean, wala naman po masama sa pag-rally, madam. Kasi freedom of expression, di ba, kasama din po yun. So there's nothing wrong with that. It will depend kasi kung ano yung dahilan. Siyempre, may inis tayo kung illegal yung decision, hindi based on factor on law, di ba? It doesn't matter, says, ikaw po, mula nung lang ka. But why are you making this personal? May maganda na po bang nagawa ang komunista sa bayan? Look, I'll answer you directly. I know a lot of communists. Attorney Ahmed, who is my law partner and part of Luminous, is himself a communist. So, unless that person raises arms against the government, then that person cannot be considered a criminal. Ay, yung ginagawa mo na ngayon burden ng mga komunista na may magandang nagawa para sa bayan. But a lot of people go all through their lives just leading quiet lives and you don't make such demands on them. Bakit may ganun? Kailangan patunayan yung usefulness nila sa bayan when actually the law only requires that you don't commit crimes. So it is not a crime. If you want to make your basis for a character judgment, gusto niyong husgahan yung pagkatao niya simply because komunista siya, then go ahead and do so. Personal mo yan. Pero wag mong idama yung batas. Sabi ni Leo Imperial, can the ATL be an issue on the presidential debates? Of course. If so, can't wait kung paano makikipagdebate si na VP Lenny, Mayor Scott, Senator Pacquiao versus Senator Lacson and BBM. Worse, tignan niyo yung mga vice presidents. Sabi ni Ma'am Christina Gianan, I was an army before I assigned in Mindanao, but I observed that many politicians are supporting the NPA and extremist groups. Yes, ma'am. And that's why the ATL, once the NPA is prescribed, will prevent that or will make it a crime for the politicians to provide any funding for them. Sorry, maingay na nga si Harry uli eh. Naririnig niya kasi yung paus ko eh. Sabi ni Don Vino, Section 4, hindi po, yung last phrase lang. Hindi na siya pwedeng baguhin. Binago na nga ng Supreme Court, only the last phrase po ang tinanggal niya. Sabi ni Ronald Bravo, I read Karl Marx and Trotsky pero di ako NPA. Okay, with regard to the NPA and communism, ang nawawala kasi po sa diskusyon is nuance. Tama si Ronald Bravo. The simple reading or even having a book on Marx and Trotsky and so on doesn't even make you a communist, diba? It means that you're reading up on it. We cannot tell people what to read and what not to read. Maliban lang if they are minors and you don't want them reading smut. But I think that there's a misappreciation of what our freedoms are. There is we should be free to learn, to read, to speak our minds. Hindi, as much as possible, sinasabi ng ating saligang batas, only the minimum yung maaaring i-impose na restrictions on our rights. Otherwise, dapat we can exercise it freely. Yung mga book burning, do you remember who did that book burning? The Nazis did. Before during the years of the Holocaust. It started with book burning. It started when they were saying that you have no right to do this, and this, until it steamrolled. And that's why it began. When people started saying there are things that you cannot read and there are things that you cannot think. Dun po yun. So we have to understand and we must be more nuanced. In other words, magdi-distinguish, kilalanin natin yung mga distinctions. The distinction between communism and terrorism is huge because there are terrorist groups who are not communists. But yun ang kinaanuhan ko, yun ang kinababahala ko. Kasi parang galit na galit tayo sa terorista but only if they are communists. Pero pagka mga fundamentalist groups yung mga terorista, tatahimik tayo. And they blow people up, literally. Yung mga nagbomba ng Sulu Cathedral, aren't you as mad at them? Pero you're calling a communist a terrorist simply because they're terrorists. E paano yung mga hindi komunista? Hindi na sila terrorista even if they are blowing up people? We must be nuanced. Terrorism is a crime and there are particular acts that will make that person a terrorist. Where we will consider that person a terrorist. Mere association is not terrorism. But helping a terrorist is a violation of the Terrorism Act. So, kailangan nuanced. Yun ang pinakamalaking kontribusyon ng ATL sa atin. Na natututo tayo about what distinctions we have to make. So, understand this, ha? We don't sue people because they're terrorists. We sue, put in jail, investigate people who have committed terrorist acts. Sabi ni Jade Kevin Santos, nanood at napakinggan ko one time yung The Internationale, which is a communist socialist anthem. Does that make me a communist na? Of course not. Yes, and even if you are a communist, you're not necessarily a terrorist. Ito, gusto ko to. Andy Lovebing and Buddha says, terrorists are menace be they communist or not. Yes, and remember there are many kinds of terrorists. There are those who have no ideology at all, but they just want to commit acts that destroy government. These are anarchists. Oh, um, yung religious terrorism. About those to they come from different religions. They're the Muslim fundamentalists and they're Christian fundamentalists who can also become terrorists. Right? Sabi ni Jerry Paul Labadia, last few questions, final and executory na po ba decision ng SC sa anti-terror law? Hindi pa po because it takes 15 days from receipt by the respondents for it to become final. And during those 15 days, they have the right to file a motion for reconsideration. Ito, sabi niya, it doesn't matter. Tama po kayo, hindi krimen o terorista ang komunista. Ideology lang po ito. Isang pananaw at adikain. Bakit po need ng armas o milisya? Hindi po ba pwede sa argumento ito daan? Tama kayo. Pero mayroon nga mga tao, that's why we're saying, what we punish is rebellion, not communism. Once these people who consider themselves communist pick up arms against the government, then that becomes a crime. Now, bakit nila need ng armas? Ito yung suspetsya ko. Because they will not be taken seriously otherwise. In other words, they've already lost the argument. Kaya bakbakan na sila. Karen Minyao says, need pa rin ba ng proscription ISIS at Abu Sayyaf? Locally, yes. But if they commit terrorist acts, they'll be, regardless of their prescription, they can be already, chilled. Okay, ganito ha. Yung prescription, para yun sa mga things like recruitment. Okay, kailangan proscribed sila. Pero, if this person commits a terrorist act under Section 4, then mag-a-apply pa rin yung batas sa kanila. You don't, it's not necessarily for, it's necessary for you to be proscribed as a terrorist for you to be liable under the terrorism law. Ang dami niyo pa rin, ha? Mayamang tol, kakabitin na ng mga Marcos ang isang katutak na issue detractors. Parang ang hirap pag nanalo si BBM, di mo na alam kung ano ang totoong nangyayari. Sana may magtanong kung anong technique, ano ito, ang gagawin. Hindi ko po nag-gets yun. With the initiative of PRRD, sabi ni Ronaldo Almendral, at least thanks to Senators Soto and Lacson for authoring or supporting the ATL, and I think that the minimal Supreme Court revisions will not dwindle its effect. On the contrary, it makes it sharper. Okay, maraming salamat, sabi ni Flavie Serafico sa malinaw na pagpapaliwanag. Maraming salamat din sa lahat ng sumubaybay dito sa live natin. Naku, napahaba na naman tayo. Ang hirap mag-share ng mahahaba. So, pasensya na po. But, I think one of the things that Luminous should be doing is making excerpts of these lives. Wala lang po kasi akong oras. Gayon pa man, maraming salamat at sinaganyo niyo po akong samahan dito sa live natin. We will still talk about the anti-terrorism law tomorrow and Karambola. So, yung mga hindi ko nasagot na mga tanong, sama niyo po dun sa comment section natin, Facebook at saka YouTube tomorrow po sa Karambola. And ano po ba? Maraming salamat sa lahat ng nagpadala sa ating super chat at super stickers. And again, uy Ma'am Yoli Sarmak nakahabol. Thank you very much. At nagpapasalamat din ako po sa lahat ng mga matatalinong tanong at saka even if you think that hindi maganda yung tanong ninyo pero nabasa natin at meron tayong na-explain, nakakatulong po talaga ito sa pagkakaintindi natin ng mga issues dito at pagpapaintindi sa ibang tao tungkol dito sa mga issues. And the more we understand about our rights and the law, the better protected we are and the better protected our society is. Hindi rin tayo masyadong maloloko ng mga politikong pulpul kapag naintindihan natin what is going on. So, ikalat po natin yung mga impormasyon and let's bring the discussion up to a higher level this time. And let's bring more people into the conversation. Ito po yung Hi, Miss Eden. Si Miss Eden gave me my cup. Anyway, ah, so kaya po natin, pinapaalala ko lang, kaya po natin ginagawa to is so that more people can participate in the national conversation at nagiging mas pantay yung kaalaman natin tungkol dito sa mga issue. So maraming salamat. Samahan niyo po kami sa Karambola bukas. It's a Friday. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody.